My name is Rita Lewis. I'm 35 years old. And this is the story of how I went from being erased from my husband's life to reclaiming everything they tried to steal, piece by piece. It started with a coffee cup. That morning, I sat in my small kitchen in Charleston, sunlight spilling across the wooden table, glinting off the rim of my cup. The warmth in my hands felt familiar, almost comforting, but the taste was dull, lifeless. Bitter in a way that coffee alone couldn't explain. I scrolled my phone absently, glancing through the usual work emails and discount promotions, half-heartedly waiting for something urgent. And then it happened. The moment that cracked my world open with a single swipe. A video. Looping over and over. Natalie's face, a radiant, smug, filled the screen. She was on a yacht. Laughing, tilting her head, champagne in hand. Behind her, white leather cushions, turquoise water, the kind of luxury that only came from old family money and older habits. The caption? Off on the annual family trip aboard Charlotte's Grace. So excited. I blinked. I reread it. Charlotte's Grace. The yacht named after my mother-in-law, Charlotte Miller. A symbol of the Miller family legacy. A tradition I had never once been excluded from until now. And yet, there it was. They had all gone without me. No one had told me. Not a text. Not a call. Not even a "we'll miss you." I scrolled further. More images. Jeremy, my husband, standing near the helm, relaxed and happy. Charlotte and Donald clinking glasses in matching linen outfits. Sean, Jeremy's brother, cozying up with a new girlfriend I'd never even heard of. But not me. Not in a single frame. Not even a tag. I opened the Miller family group chat, Connect and Love, a thread that once buzzed constantly with updates and emojis. It was dead silent. No explanation. Not even a "sorry you couldn't make it." I set my phone down. The coffee had gone cold. But it wasn't the exclusion that shattered me, it was the sudden, sharp realization of how long this had been building. Natalie skipped invite to her birthday brunch 3 years ago. Charlotte's constant "oh, you didn't get the reminder" texts. Jeremy's vague excuses whenever family events slipped his mind. Last Thanksgiving, I ate dinner alone in our apartment while he claimed to be caught up at work. He never came home until midnight. I had even defended him to my own mother, saying he was just tired. Maybe I was tired too, tired of pretending. They had been ghosting me in real time, and I let them. But that morning, something shifted. There was no more pretending. No more giving the benefit of the doubt. Because right then, my inbox pinged with something that made everything snap into focus. Subject, Cabin 5 cancellation confirmation, Charlotte's Grace. From Harbor Lux Yacht Services. I opened the email, my heart racing. Cabin 5. My cabin. The one I always used, with the custom shelving I designed myself. The cancellation request? Requested by Natalie Jones. 3 days ago. I sat still, rage flickering under my skin, oddly calm. Because in that quiet moment, I realized this wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was coordinated. Calculated. And just as I was about to close the email, another message came through, one that wasn't meant for me. Natalie had accidentally sent it to the wrong Rita in her contacts. Don't worry. It's done. Rita won't be coming. Everything's handled. See you on deck. I stared at the words. My hand didn't even tremble. There was no heartbreak left in me, only clarity. I stood up slowly, walked to the study, and opened the bottom drawer of the oak cabinet. I had kept something there for years. A folder labeled "Only Private." Inside were pages of contracts, receipts, wire transfer confirmations. Every document related to the yacht purchase. I had paid for Charlotte's Grace. Not all of it, but most of it. More than Jeremy had. The initial deposit? My account. The design upgrades? My decisions. The reason the yacht even existed was because I pushed for it to replace the old one after it failed inspection. My name was on the title, not just his. In fact, it came first. And I hadn't just signed a dotted line. I had built it. Maintained it. Nurtured it. The final nail came hours later, when I found another email, this time from the Miller family's law firm. Subject: Proposal to amend ownership, Charlotte's Grace. To Natalie Jones. Dear Ms. Jones. Attached is the draft adjustment for Charlotte's Grace yacht ownership, removing Rita Lewis from the title for ease of family asset management. Please confirm once finalized. I stared at the screen, blinking slowly. There were no more illusions to protect. They were trying to erase me. So I did the one thing they never expected, I got ready. Not to beg. Not to cry. But to rise. That night, Jeremy came home late, reeking of saltwater and sunscreen. I was still at the table, a fresh coffee gone cold again. You didn't go out today? He asked, casually. I looked up at him. Your family went on the yacht trip, didn't they? He froze. The silence between us throbbed. Maybe Mom didn't get a chance to tell you. Save it, I said quietly. He didn't argue. He didn't apologize. He just sighed and walked away like a man who didn't know how much fire he had just lit under someone's resolve. I didn't sleep that night. I gathered every document into a neat folder. Printed copies. Highlighted passages. Flagged the original contract showing my name, date stamped and signed. By dawn, I was standing by the window, watching the sun paint the rooftops gold. I booked a one-way ride to the Miami Marina. Charlotte's Grace was docked there, polished and pristine, the same yacht they tried to erase me from. But they had made one mistake. One fatal mistake. They forgot I still held the keys. The car ride to Miami Marina was quiet, just the sound of tires humming over asphalt and the occasional seagull overhead. I didn't need music. The sound of my heartbeat was enough. It thudded with a calm, focused rhythm, not out of fear, but purpose. I wore a simple navy dress and a light ivory blazer. No designer logos, no screaming statements. I didn't need to dress to impress anyone. The only thing I carried was my leather bag, containing every document that proved I wasn't just invited to the party, I owned the damn venue. When the marina came into view, the sun had just begun to rise higher, casting a gold shimmer across the bay. From the distance, Charlotte's Grace looked like a postcard, immaculate white, clean lines, and a flag fluttering lazily at the stern. As I stepped out of the car and walked along the wooden dock, I spotted them. All of them. Natalie in a flowing floral dress, performing for her audience, a wine glass in hand. Charlotte in her signature wide-brimmed sun hat, surrounded by a few friends, laughing like nothing in the world had gone wrong. And Jeremy, my husband, or whatever was left of him in my heart, leaning casually against the railing with sunglasses on, pretending to be part of some magazine ad. Then Natalie turned and saw me. It was like a movie scene. Her face stiffened. Her smile dropped mid-sip. The glass in her hand shook slightly, though she tried to pretend she hadn't just seen a ghost walk up the dock. I didn't break eye contact. I didn't smile. I reached the gangway and was about to step up when a crew member, an older man in a crisp uniform, appeared and gave a small bow. Welcome aboard, Mrs. Lewis. It's an honor to greet the owner. The words echoed like a bell. Clear. Unmistakable. Loud enough for everyone on that yacht to hear. Jeremy's sunglasses slipped slightly down his nose as he looked toward the crew member, confused. Charlotte froze mid-laugh, blinking as if her memory had failed her. Natalie's mouth parted in disbelief. I met the crew member's eyes. Thank you. Permission to board? Of course, ma'am. And with that, I stepped onto my yacht. The deck was spotless. The teak floors gleamed, the railing freshly polished. Everything I had approved in the design stage was here, the cobalt accents, the walnut cabinetry inside the main cabin, the art I had hand-picked from a local Charleston gallery. I knew every inch of this ship better than they did. Because I had built it, not from wood but from sacrifices. As I walked toward the main lounge area, I could feel them behind me. The whispers. The shifting feet. The weight of a truth they could no longer dodge. Inside, the captain, an older gentleman with silver hair and the calm eyes of a man who had seen every kind of drama, stood at attention. "Mrs. Lewis," he said. "We are prepared to depart when you give the word." I nodded. "Let's wait until all our guests are aboard." He understood. With a slight nod, he walked away. I stepped out to the deck railing, where I could hear Natalie's heels clicking toward me. "Rita," she said, her voice sugar-laced with panic, "this isn't necessary." "Necessary?" I turned to her. "I'm simply taking a ride on my own property." Natalie faltered. "We didn't mean for this to look, this is just a misunderstanding." "No," I said calmly, "this is the end of one." She stared at me, searching for some softness in my eyes. But there was none. Only the quiet, steady conviction of someone who'd already cried all their tears. Behind her, Charlotte stood awkwardly, adjusting her hat. Jeremy still hadn't said a word. I walked into the main cabin, opened a drawer near the navigation console, and pulled out a bound folder. Inside were the documents. I walked out slowly and placed it on the cocktail table where the family was now awkwardly gathering, pretending everything was fine. "Since we're here," I said, "let me remind you what this yacht actually is." Jeremy cleared his throat. "Rita, maybe we should." "Don't interrupt me," I said, my voice low but razor-sharp. I flipped open the folder. "This is the purchase contract. Signed by me. This is the wire transfer receipt for the initial deposit, $125,000, from my personal account. Here's the custom interior design correspondence sent from my work email, confirmed and executed by the build team. Here's the payment for the sound system, the lighting, the cabinetry. And this," I pulled out a glossy letter, "is a copy of the law firm's draft proposal, Natalie, where you requested I be removed from the ownership list. Care to explain that one?" Silence. Jeremy looked at Natalie, his face slowly contorting from confusion to fury. "You did what?" Charlotte sat down, her hands trembling. "Natalie, please tell me this isn't true." Natalie swallowed hard. "It was for asset simplification. I didn't mean any harm. We just thought." "Who's we?" I asked. "Because this was deliberate. And if you think this is just about a yacht, you've learned nothing about me in the last 10 years. The room was still. Jeremy opened his mouth, then shut it. He looked like a man realizing he had helped dig his own grave with silence. I gathered the folder and held it against my chest. My voice dropped slightly, almost tender. I stayed quiet for years. I told myself I was being gracious. I let things slide because I thought they were just misunderstandings. But what you've done isn't a misunderstanding, it's erasure. Charlotte finally spoke, her voice soft. "Rita. I didn't know." I looked at her, then at Jeremy. "I'm not here for your apologies," I said. "I'm here because the truth deserves space. And because no one gets to erase what I've built." And with that, I turned and walked back to the upper deck. The sea wind met me like an embrace. The smell of salt and horizon filled my lungs. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt complete. Later that evening, as the yacht cut smoothly across the water under a golden sky, the dinner table was set with crystal glasses and polished silverware. A beautiful meal had been prepared. Natalie tried to resume her role as the center of attention. But everything had shifted. The guests looked at her differently now. The seat at the head of the table, the one she had once claimed, was empty. Because I was sitting exactly where I belonged. And I wasn't leaving again. Dinner on Charlotte's Grace that night was like walking through a stage set with the lights turned too bright and the actors forgetting their lines. The mood was stiff, the conversations forced, and even the laughter rang hollow. Silverware clinked softly against porcelain plates, but no one dared speak about the truth that had just been dropped like a weight onto their perfect cruise. I didn't touch my wine. I didn't need to. My presence alone had sobered the entire table. Natalie sat with her shoulders tense, jaw tight, hands trembling slightly as she lifted her fork. She was trying, desperately, to salvage the performance. Jeremy sat at the far end, quiet, eyes avoiding mine, while Charlotte stared out of the window at the sea like she was somewhere far away. Not one of them dared to acknowledge the truth outright, but it hovered above us all like smoke from a fire they thought they'd hidden. Until I moved. Quietly, I reached for my leather bag that rested beside my chair and set it on the table. Every fork paused mid-air. Conversations stopped. Even the captain glanced in through the open doorway as if he, too, could sense what was coming. I opened the folder and slowly laid out each document on the pristine white tablecloth, like cards in a magician's act, except this trick couldn't be undone. The yacht purchase contract, my signature bold and clear at the bottom. The email trail of every transaction, each upgrade, maintenance cost, deposit made from my personal account. And finally, the most damning of all, a printed transcript of the voicemail that had accompanied the legal draft, Natalie's voice, crisp and unmistakable. She won't be coming. I've already arranged to have her name taken off. The less she knows, the better. Silence. You could hear the waves slapping against the hull outside. I let the documents sit there, untouched, undeniable. I think, I said gently, it's time we stop pretending. Natalie was the first to break. This is out of context, she stammered, her voice faltering. Context? I echoed. Did I hallucinate the cancellation email? Or the draft from your lawyer? Maybe I imagined being erased from a trip I helped build? Charlotte looked at her niece, stunned. Natalie, you sent that? You actually asked the lawyers to. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Natalie blurted. It was just supposed to be, simplifying. Making it easier for everyone. Easier. The word nearly made me laugh. It had never been easy for me. Not once in this family. Not when Charlotte introduced me as Jeremy's +1 to her friends years after our wedding. Not when Natalie said we liked to keep traditions blood only while pouring wine I had bought. Not when Jeremy forgot to include me in group photos, holidays, or plans year after year. Do you know, I said, folding my hands calmly on the table, that I once sat through Charlotte's birthday dinner, smiling politely, while every one of you made toasts I wasn't invited to make? I saw the pictures afterward. Not one of you even thought to say I was there. Jeremy shifted in his seat. Rita. Don't, I said softly. Not yet. He went quiet. I turned to Natalie. You wanted to erase me. You wanted the yacht, the narrative, the image, but without the woman who made it possible. What you didn't count on was that I kept receipts. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. I turned to Jeremy, finally. You let this happen. You stood by and watched them exclude me from your life. You knew what they were doing. You may not have canceled the reservation or sent that email, but you helped them build the silence. His eyes were rimmed with shame. He rubbed the bridge of his nose like the truth physically hurt him. I thought if I kept the peace, it would work itself out. I thought if I stayed out of it. You were complicit, I said, calmly but firmly. You chose comfort over courage. He swallowed hard. I was a coward. Yes, I whispered. You were. Across the table, the guests sat frozen. Some were distant relatives, others family friends, people who had come to drink wine and toast to wealth. Now, they avoided eye contact. I didn't blame them. They didn't need to say anything. I had already said enough for all of us. When I was done, I collected the papers without another word. I didn't need to argue. The evidence spoke louder than rage. As I stood, one of Jeremy's cousins, Daniel, cleared his throat nervously. Rita, would you mind if we heard the rest of your story? I think we owe you that much. I paused. That surprised me. And then, slowly, I nodded. I don't need to be heard anymore, I said. But I will say this, truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to exist. And tonight, it finally does. With that, I turned and walked away from the table. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I stepped out into the open air and let the breeze wash over me. The moon was climbing high, casting a silver path across the dark ocean. I stood by the railing and let the salt of the sea replace the salt of old wounds. Behind me, I heard chairs scraping and hurried voices. The evening had collapsed. The fantasy was over. I pulled out my phone and saw a message from Callista, an old friend from college who had become a journalist. I had forwarded her the documents earlier that day, not out of spite, but because I knew stories like mine went untold too often. Her message was simple. It's live. Front page. They won't be able to hide this now. It's going viral. I opened the article link. The headline stopped my breath. The woman they tried to erase, the real owner of Charlotte's Grace speaks. The article was fair, sharp, and powerful. It detailed how a woman was slowly edged out of a powerful family's narrative. It spoke not just about me, but every woman who had been silenced with politeness and erased with fake smiles. I scrolled through the comments. Thousands already. She built it, they tried to steal it. This hit too close to home. Blood doesn't define family. Respect does. Tears prickled in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I stood tall, the wind tangling my hair, my hands resting on the cold rail of the yacht I had named, designed, and protected. They had tried to take everything from me. But they forgot who really owned the ship. And now, the whole world knew too. The morning after the storm was always the quietest. Charlotte's Grace rocked gently in the soft waves, as if the sea itself had decided to give everyone a moment of silence. The deck was unusually still. No champagne bottles popped. No cameras clicked. The only sound was the distant cry of seagulls and the occasional creak of sun-warmed wood. I sipped tea alone on the upper deck, wrapped in a light shawl, the ocean breeze brushing against my cheek. For the first time in years, I wasn't performing. I wasn't pretending to belong. I simply was. And the yacht beneath me, the one they tried to strip from me, held me like something that finally recognized its true owner. Below, Natalie wasn't filming morning yoga or taking selfies. She hadn't even come out of her room. Word had spread. Callista's article had hit a nerve. Not just in their circles, but online, everywhere. Hashtag Rita owns Grace. Hashtag the woman they erased. Hashtag silent no more. Those hashtags flooded social media. People from every walk of life, women, professionals, entrepreneurs, commented, shared, and wrote their own stories beneath the headline. Strangers who didn't know me saw themselves in what had happened. They weren't responding to luxury or drama. They were responding to injustice. I was halfway through my tea when Jeremy appeared. He looked older than he had just 2 days ago. There were lines around his eyes that weren't there before. His usual polished smile had vanished, replaced by something raw and uncertain. Rita, he said, gently. I didn't move. You're not here to apologize again, are you? He shook his head. No. I've already failed enough with silence. I just wanted you to know. I read the article. And I know what people are saying. But more than that, his voice caught, I finally heard what you've been trying to say for years. I looked at him then, not out of longing, but curiosity. And what do you think I was saying, Jeremy? He walked slowly to the railing and stood beside me, but not too close. That you didn't need their approval. You needed mine. And I gave you neither. I said nothing. I thought, he continued, that if I kept things quiet, if I avoided conflict, it meant I was protecting you. But I was just protecting myself. I watched the water glint in the sunlight. I've called the lawyer, he said. I'm having your name placed as sole owner. Fully. Officially. No co-title. No joint anything. I turned to him. Not because you want forgiveness. No, he nodded. Because it's what's right. And because you earned it long before I ever noticed. The silence between us wasn't cold anymore. Just done. I'm not coming back, I said finally. I know. We stood there for a few moments longer, letting the breeze pass through the space where a marriage had once lived. Later that day, the rest of the guests began to awkwardly gather on deck. No more drinks. No more matching outfits. The tone had shifted. There were quiet murmurs, stilted laughter. People were unsure how to act around me. That's when Charlotte stepped out. She looked different. Not just older, but stripped of her armor, the wide-brimmed hat, the pearls, the command. She walked over slowly, hands folded in front of her. I suppose I should thank you, she said. I raised an eyebrow. For exposing your family? For not going further. You could have humiliated us. Destroyed the name. But you didn't. I tilted my head slightly. I didn't need to destroy anything, Charlotte. The truth did that on its own. She nodded, looking away. Do you remember, I said, the first time I stepped on this yacht? She turned back, slowly. Yes. You wore those ridiculous sandals. And I was the only one who showed up with a business binder, I added, a small smile touching my lips. While everyone else drank, I was negotiating with the dock engineer. Charlotte exhaled, a touch of sadness in her eyes. You always belonged here more than any of us, she said quietly. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Her silence, for once, wasn't dismissal. It was surrender. That evening, I went down to the reading lounge, a cozy room I'd personally designed, a quiet escape with built-in shelves and soft lighting. I curled into the armchair and opened my laptop, thinking it was time to move forward. Then a message pinged. From Maya. Natalie's niece. Hi Aunt Rita. I hope it's okay I call you that. I just wanted to say I saw everything. And I'm sorry. I never understood. But I've always looked up to you. I'm applying to a startup grant and I'd be honored if you could read my business plan. I stared at the message. I remembered her, quiet, always watching. She never joined in Natalie's cruelty. She was never part of the whispers. Maybe she had been learning in silence. I replied, send it. I'll help however I can. And just like that, a door opened. A few hours later, her proposal arrived, an idea for a small organic bakery near her college. It was rough. Underdeveloped. But it had heart. I smiled. That night, I sat on the deck under a sky full of stars. The hum of the yacht was soft beneath me. The sea was calm, but something inside me stirred, not unrest, but hope. For the first time in years, I saw the future. Not as something I was allowed into, but something I could build. My way. My table. My legacy. The next morning, the sun crept over the horizon in soft bands of coral and peach. Charlotte's Grace floated gently on still waters, but the tension among its passengers had shifted into something heavier, remorse. I stood barefoot on the upper deck, arms crossed as the breeze teased the ends of my robe. I watched the sleepy marina blink to life in the distance, boats shifting on their moorings, deckhands moving like shadows. And in that quiet hour, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. Not because anything had been resolved, but because I had stopped shrinking. Inside, the breakfast table had been laid, though fewer guests appeared that morning. No more showy croissants from the local French baker. No fresh mimosas delivered with flair. Just silence. Just consequence. Natalie didn't leave her cabin. Jeremy barely made eye contact. And Charlotte sat in the reading room with a journal open in her lap, staring at a blank page. But I wasn't waiting for any of them. I had a call with Maya. When I opened my laptop, there she was on the screen, her face half lit by morning sunlight, glasses slipping slightly down her nose. Her expression was nervous but eager, like a student waiting for a grade that mattered more than any diploma. "Hi," she said, adjusting her camera. "I, just wanted to thank you again for looking at the plan. I didn't expect." I smiled gently. "You didn't expect someone like me to say yes?" She paused, caught. "I just thought, after everything, maybe you wouldn't want to help anyone from our family." "You're not Natalie," I said simply. "And I don't believe in punishing people for someone else's cruelty." She exhaled a breath she had clearly been holding. "Thank you." Her plan was still early stage, a bakery focused on organic ingredients for the student community near her campus, with late-night hours and allergy-conscious options. She had heart. She just needed guidance. We went through her cost projections, and I explained inventory models, supplier negotiations, and what she needed to adjust in her pitch for the startup grant. By the end of the call, her hands were scribbled with notes. Her eyes sparkled. "You really think I can do this?" she asked. "I don't just think you can," I said. "I think you already started." Her face lit up, but before she could reply, a soft knock came on the door to my suite. I opened it to find Charlotte standing there, not in linen or pearls, but in a plain cardigan and slippers. She held something wrapped in an old scarf. "I won't stay long," she said. I wanted you to have this." She unwrapped the scarf, revealing a framed photograph of me, years ago, standing on the very deck we were now sailing, holding a blueprint and laughing with a young designer. I didn't even know the photo existed. "I found it this morning," she said. "Buried in the back of a drawer. I think Natalie was the one who tucked it away years ago. But I looked at it this morning and thought, that's the woman who made this happen. And I never said thank you." I stared at the image. I barely remembered the moment. But there it was, my joy, unfiltered. Before the erasure. Before the cold smiles and closed doors. "You never had to say thank you," I said softly. "No," she replied. "But I should have." She left the photo on the table and stepped out without another word. I stared at the image for a long time, then placed it on the wall above the desk, next to my favorite window. A piece of proof, not for the world, but for me. Later that afternoon, I walked the length of the deck and saw Sean, Jeremy's younger brother, lingering by the portside railing. He looked like he wanted to disappear into the ocean. When he saw me, he stood straighter. "Hey, Rita." I raised an eyebrow. "I mean, Samantha." "Sorry." I chuckled. "You always called me Rita." "I don't mind." He nodded, nervous. I wanted to say something." "Go ahead." "I should have spoken up," he said quickly, words tumbling out like bricks. "I saw the way they excluded you. Especially Natalie. I knew what was happening. I thought staying out of it made me neutral." "It doesn't," I replied. "Silence never is." "I know that now," he admitted, shame coloring his tone. "And I'm sorry. I really am." I looked at him, not with anger, but with the kind of disappointment that leaves a scar. You're not the only one who stayed quiet. But you're one of the few who owned it. He exhaled. If there's anything I can do to help, anything, just say it. I thought about it for a second. Yes. Help Maya. His face lit up. Really? She's trying to build something from the ground up. And she doesn't have anyone showing her how. Be that person. He nodded, fiercely. I will. That evening, as the sun set and turned the sky lavender, I received a package delivered to the yacht. Inside was a printed copy of Callista's article, now featured in a respected magazine. On the cover, a black and white still of Charlotte's Grace. In the headline, she wasn't invited. She was the owner. Callista's pen had become a sword. And it had sliced through the illusion the Millers had carefully maintained for years. The article's final paragraph read, "In the end, she didn't need to raise her voice. Her truth had already been written on every receipt, every signature, every unacknowledged contribution. They tried to erase her. But she had already carved her name into the foundation." That night, I stood at the bow of the yacht, hair tangled in the wind, holding that magazine in my hands. I didn't smile. I didn't weep. I simply exhaled. Because for the first time in my life, I felt seen. The days that followed on Charlotte's Grace were quieter. The yacht still glided elegantly across the water, but it no longer carried the same air of entitlement and pretense. There were no staged photo shoots, no family declarations of legacy. What lingered instead was truth, and its weight sat heavier than any luxury ever could. Most of the guests had disembarked quietly, one by one, at ports along the Florida Keys, claiming urgent business or suddenly remembered obligations. It was easier than facing the woman they had pretended didn't exist. I stayed. Not to make a point, but because I had every right to. Mornings were now peaceful. I brewed my own tea, opened the windows to let the breeze in, and reviewed Maya's revised business plan. She had made remarkable progress in just 3 days. Her numbers were tighter, her vision clearer. When she called again, her confidence had bloomed. "I submitted the application," she said, her eyes lit up with pride. "I wouldn't have done it without you." "You did all the work, Maya," I said. "I just helped you believe it mattered." Her smile widened. "I hope I grow up to be like you." I paused, touched in a way I didn't expect. "You already are." That afternoon, as the yacht anchored in a quiet cove just south of Key Largo, Jeremy asked to speak with me again. I agreed, more out of closure than curiosity. We sat on the back deck, the sky turning a shade of pale gold. The same place we had once celebrated our engagement, when I was full of dreams and he was still a man I believed would protect them. "I've thought about what you said," he began, his voice low. "About how silence is complicity." I looked out at the waves. "And?" "I lived too long trying to keep the peace by doing nothing. I let Natalie and the others turn you into an outsider. And I didn't just let it happen, I benefited from it. I was weak, Rita. I see that now." He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a finalized ownership transfer document. My name, now listed as the sole owner of Charlotte's Grace. No strings. No hidden clauses. "I know it doesn't fix anything," he said. "But you deserve everything this yacht represents. You always did." I didn't thank him. It wasn't a gift. It was long overdue justice. Instead, I asked, "What will you do now?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But I do know this, I'll never pretend again that watching is the same as standing up." I stood, the envelope tucked into my folder of records, the wind tugging at the hem of my dress. Good. Start there. That night, as the stars reflected off the still water, I sat alone at the reading nook and opened a small wooden box I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a yellowed piece of paper, my father's handwriting, crisp and steady. Don't fight for a seat. Build your own table. I ran my fingers over the ink, the same way I had years ago when I found it in my college suitcase. I hadn't understood it then. Not really. Now, I did. I had spent years trying to earn a seat at the Miller table, serving, sacrificing, giving, forgiving. All for people who saw me as decoration at best, a threat at worst. But what they didn't understand was that I was never meant to sit at their table. I was meant to build my own. And I had. Piece by piece. Nail by nail. Truth by truth. The next morning, I sent a message to Callista. She'd asked if I wanted to do a follow-up interview now that the first article had made national news. No interview, I replied. But I'll send a statement. Not for them, for the ones still waiting to be seen. I wrote it with care, and she published it without edits. You don't need their seat. You don't need their praise. What you need is to trust your work, your worth, and your vision. The tables built on false legacy will eventually fall. But the ones built with quiet strength, those last. As the article spread, new messages came. From women I'd never met. From entrepreneurs, students, even strangers who had followed the drama out of curiosity but stayed for the truth. They didn't see a yacht. They saw a reflection of themselves. One message stood out. It was from Ruth, Jeremy's aunt, the one who'd always defended Natalie's antics with a tight smile and the excuse of family loyalty. Samantha, she wrote, I've spent years pretending not to see. You didn't just survive what they did, you exposed it without ever raising your voice. Thank you. For reminding me what dignity actually looks like. I read her message twice. Then set it aside. I didn't need their validation anymore. But I could appreciate their growth. The final afternoon aboard Charlotte's Grace, I hosted a small lunch, not for closure, not for ceremony, but for the few who had truly stood beside me or were learning to. Maya joined via video call. Callista, in person. Ronald, the lawyer who helped make sure my rights were protected when no one else bothered to. We sat at a modest table I had set with my own hands. Nothing fancy. Just food that meant something. Stories that mattered. And people who valued what was real. This, Ronald said, raising a glass of sparkling cider, is the kind of legacy people can't buy. We toasted, not to revenge, not to money, but to rebuilding. To tables we create ourselves. As the boat gently swayed, Callista leaned toward me with a knowing smile. You realize your story is bigger than Charlotte's Grace, right? She asked. I nodded. This was never about a yacht, I said. It was about being told you don't belong and proving, quietly, clearly, fully, that you always did. And now, I did. I returned home to Charleston with the sun at my back and peace in my chest. The small lake house that once felt like a lonely outpost after years of being sidelined was now my sanctuary. The porch overlooked a sloping yard that kissed the edge of the water, where ducks often glided past like they had nowhere else more important to be. I unpacked slowly. Not just clothes and travel bags, but the version of myself I'd finally reclaimed. The woman who no longer whispered her worth. The one who no longer questioned whether her place at the table had been earned. Because now, I had built my own. The first thing I did was set up that wooden table I bought years ago from a struggling local carpenter, a single mother who sold handmade pieces to feed her children. I had tucked it away, always thinking I'd wait until the perfect moment. I no longer waited. I placed it right on the back porch under the trellis, draped with climbing vines and morning glories. No silverware. No floral arrangements. Just a pitcher of sweet tea, a bowl of citrus from the backyard tree, and a vase of wildflowers. A few days later, I hosted a brunch. Not for appearances. For people who saw me, who stood with me. Callista came first, wearing sunglasses too big for her face and a box of warm berry tarts she claimed were stolen from a cafe in town. We laughed like sisters. Ronald arrived with his usual homemade cider and a new legal contract template for Maya, already half-marked with yellow notes. Maddie, Jeremy's cousin and the only one who had ever quietly pulled me aside with truth in her eyes, brought a bouquet of sunflowers and an apology I'd already accepted in silence years ago. We ate, not like guests performing roles, but like friends living freely. No cameras. No family politics. Just conversation about dreams, business ideas, and books we hadn't made time to read. We didn't talk about Charlotte's Grace. We didn't need to. By the end, the table was covered in crumbs and laughter. Before everyone left, Maddie placed a small card beside my teacup. It read, "You didn't just survive their silence. You changed what survival looks like." Later that week, I received a message from Maya. "Aunt Rita, I got it. The startup grant. They said my application was one of the most complete they've seen." Attached was a picture of her acceptance letter. In the photo, her face shone with disbelief and joy, the kind of glow that comes when a door opens for the first time. I called her immediately. "You did it," I said. She beamed. "No, we did. You showed me how to walk in the room like I already belong." "I didn't show you," I replied. "I reminded you." That Sunday, I found myself cleaning out my old office drawers, where for years I had stuffed copies of contracts, proof of payments, email threads, and every receipt I had kept in case I needed to defend my value. I used to think those papers were armor. Now, they were just remnants of a battle I'd already won. I neatly packed them into a storage box and labeled it "Past. Not permission." And at the very bottom of the drawer, something unexpected waited, a small, yellowed envelope with my father's handwriting. I'd already found the paper that said, "Don't fight for a seat. Build your own table." But inside this one was something else, an old birthday card. "The world won't always welcome you with open arms. That doesn't mean you don't walk in with your head high. Be the woman who doesn't knock. Be the woman who builds the house." I folded it back up and slipped it into the wooden keepsake box on my desk. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves. I stepped onto the porch and looked at the table again, the one I'd set with no audience in mind. A legacy is not the wealth you keep. It's the courage you hand to someone else. So when Maya asked if I'd mentor another young woman from her campus, I didn't hesitate. "Bring her by," I said. "We'll sit at the table. She doesn't need to knock." I didn't need headlines anymore. I didn't need to be the loudest voice in the room. I had something stronger. I had truth. And the truth doesn't need to scream. It just needs to stand. In life, there will always be people who try to silence you, sideline you, or make you question your worth. But your value isn't decided by their table, it's defined by your own. Build it. Own it. And when they try to erase your name, remind them, your story was never written with their pen. If Rita's story spoke to you, tell us in the comments, have you ever been excluded from something you helped build? How did you rise? Make sure to follow Revenge Echoes for more powerful stories about truth, dignity, and the quiet revenge that speaks louder than any outburst.